Osio, Dakwa Doa, Hia Becky Oberg, G. Jalagi Nudagi. Would you pay to pray? What if the price were your life? For three followers of self-help guru James Arthur Ray, that is exactly what happened. Ray conducted a mockery of the Lakota Sweat Lodge ceremony, resulting in the deaths of 3 people and hospitalization of 18 people, who paid almost $10,000 apiece for the right to participate in what he claimed would be a life-changing spiritual warrior retreat, including a, quote, Native American sweat lodge, end quote. What is a sweat lodge? A purification ceremony that originated with the Lakota, the Sweat Lodge ceremony has spread to other tribes due to the Pan-Indian movement. It has served as a way for non-Lakota to connect with the Creator, and many of those traditions were lost due to the boarding schools, the Court of Indian Offenses, and other anti-traditional movements. The lodge itself is built from wood and breathable materials such as blankets or hides. During the ceremony, heated rocks called grandfathers are carried into the lodge and placed in a fire pit. Water is poured on them, and herbs such as sage and cedar are added, causing a medicinal steam to rise. My tribe, the Texas Cherokee, also add osha root. Temperatures in the lodge frequently reach 100 to 120 degrees, causing participants to sweat, hence the name Sweat Lodge. The ceremony is conducted by a fire keeper who trains for 8 years before being allowed to lead the ceremony. The ceremony is usually broken up in 4 rounds, with each round representing a spiritual principle. For example, my tribe uses the 3rd round for healing. After the end of each round, the door to the lodge is opened, letting in fresh air and cooling the temperature of the lodge. No one is forced to stay in the lodge, and participants typically share a small meal afterwards and fast beforehand. Each person brings something to the lodge. Ray conducted what the Lakota described as a mockery and desecration the sacred ceremony. But who is James Arthur Ray? Best known for his book Harmonic Wealth, The Secret of Attracting the Life You Want, which promises infinite riches to people who just think positive, Ray promotes a mixture of motivational speaking, self-help psychology, the law of attraction, and new thought. I fully know, for me, that there is no blame. Every single thing is your responsibility, and nothing is your fault, because every single thing that comes to you is a gift, a lesson. Ray uses sleep deprivation, fire and glass walking, fasting from food and water, and other controversial methods in his seminars. Safety concerns for Ray's methods were first raised in 2000 when a woman at a retreat in Disney World shattered her hand while attempting to break a board during a martial arts exercise. In another incident, a man was told to put an arrow against the soft part of his neck and lean against it. The shaft of the arrow snapped, and the arrowhead penetrated the man's eyebrow. In 2005, during another Sweat Lodge ceremony, a man was hospitalized after becoming belligerent and then passing out. In 2009, one woman who had spent several $1,000s on his seminars was dressed as a homeless person, had her personal possessions and ID taken, and dropped off at a mall, where she jumped to her death. First, participants shaved their heads, facing ridicule if they refused. Second, they played the samurai game, in which a white-clothed Ray, literally playing God, told participants they were dead, forcing them to lie motionless. Third, they went on a vision quest, another sacred Lakota ceremony, and spent 36 hours alone in the Sedona Desert without food or water. They had sleeping bags and could purchase Peruvian ponchos for an additional $250. After the vision quest, they ate a large vegetarian breakfast and prepared to enter the lodge. More than 50 people entered the lodge. Ray sat in the shade by the door and refused to let people leave during the rounds. People who left at the end of a round were mocked, and many wanted to go back in out of fear of disappointing Mr. Ray. Temperatures reached almost 200 degrees. The boiling point of water is 212 degrees. 2 people would die almost immediately after exiting the lodge, described as having been cooked to death. A third would later die of organ failure after falling into a coma. 18 more people were hospitalized for multiple ailments ranging from heat stroke to kidney failure. The scene was so chaotic and so brutal that first responders thought they were on the scene of a mass cult suicide attempt. What went wrong? The lodge, for starters, was made of plastic, seemingly fitting for a plastic shaman, and other non-breathable materials. Ray sat in the shade in the doorway and refused to let people leave during the rounds. People that left at the end of a round were ridiculed, and many tried to re-enter the lodge out of fear of, quote, disappointing Mr. Ray, end quote. The temperature in the lodge reached nearly 200 degrees. Boiling point of water is 212 degrees. But no one knows for sure, as no one had a thermometer, and nobody knows how hot the lodge really got. The ceremony went for 8 rounds instead of the traditional 4, lasting nearly 2 hours. Even when participants began vomiting, crying, became confused, and started fainting, Ray told them, "You're more than that," or "You can do this, you're better than that," and denied them medical treatment. Article 1 of the Fort Laramie Treaty reads, "If bad men among the whites, or among other people subject to the authority of the United States, shall commit any wrong upon the person or property of the Indians, the United States will, upon proof made to the agent and forwarded to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs at Washington City, proceed at once to cause the offender to be arrested and punished according to the laws of the United States, and also reimburse the injured person for the loss sustained." This is exactly what the Lakota decided to do. They sued in Oglala Lakota Delegation of the Black Hills Sioux Nation Treaty Council et al. Versus James Arthur Ray, Angel Valley Retreat Center et al. The Lakota cited the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Articles 29 and 37, which they mistakenly identified as Article 36, as well as the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990. While the Lakota lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning the Lakota could not refile, they did get much of what they wanted. Ray was charged by the state of Arizona with murder and convicted of 3 counts of negligent homicide. He also settled wrongful death lawsuits for nearly $3 million and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. A state senator introduced legislation regulating non-Indians performing native ceremonies off tribal grounds, but withdrew the legislation upon realizing what it could mean for non-recognized tribes and people who are Indian or initiated into an Indian tradition. For example, Ray claims to have been initiated into 3 Peruvian shamanic traditions, as well as having been taught by Hawaiian kahunas, an allegedly Hawaiian philosophy known as Huna. While the Lakota lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning the tribe could not refile, they did get much of what they asked for. Ray was charged by the state of Arizona with manslaughter and convicted of 3 counts of negligent homicide, a lesser charge, but he still was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He served 18 months. He also settled wrongful death lawsuits for nearly $3 million. Justice, it would seem, was served. But how can we keep this from happening again? How can we keep this from happening again? There seems to be no easy answer. According to Oliphant versus Suquamish Indian Tribe, which was in 1978, tribal police cannot arrest non-natives for crimes committed on native land, even if the ceremony had been conducted on native land. That means that tribal police could not arrest and tribal courts could not prosecute Ray. The Cheyenne pressed for additions to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 to criminalize plastic shamans and the unscrupulous from profiting from Native American ceremonies. The Lakota tribe took it one step further, issuing a declaration of war against exploiters of Lakota spirituality. In addition, tribal ceremonies are not protected from unscrupulous plastic shamans by law, as they are considered intangible property. While copywriting ceremonies might be an option, according to Sheets, this risks ceremonies being leaked into the public domain after the copyright expires. Some ceremonial knowledge is also too sacred to be passed to non-natives, let alone written down for public consumption. While regulating who conducts native ceremonies is an option as well, and was actually attempted by State Senator Albert Hale of the Navajo Nation, Sheets writes that a ban on non-natives leading ceremonies would invite a First Amendment lawsuit. It also raises 2 questions. 1, who is an Indian? And 2, who is a spiritual leader? Ray claimed to have been initiated into 3 Peruvian shamanic traditions, still claims to have been initiated as a Toltec shaman, and claims training from kahunas in Huna, an allegedly Hawaiian spiritual belief. It is worth noting that it is illegal to impersonate clergy of most mainstream religions. The Lakota tried to get Ray accused of impersonating an Indian. According to Professor Helton, public pressure can be very effective when legislation fails. An example is the name change of the Washington Commanders football team and the Cleveland Guardians baseball team. According to Sheets, the Lakota initially asked for $5 million in direct and punitive damages in the Ray case, which would have been spent educating the public about native ceremonies and warning of the dangers of people such as Ray. Publicity also worked in favor of hindering the remorseless Ray's comeback after prison. Native nations have done what they can to speak out, protest, and boycott the abuse and misuse of sacred ceremonies, from the Cheyenne Declaration to the Declaration of War against exploiters of Lakota spirituality and the Looking Horse Proclamation on the protection of ceremonies. Public pressure from both natives and sympathetic non-natives is urged. This includes, but is not limited to, boycotts, demonstrations, press conferences, and civil disobedience. Native culture and religion are not for sale. Wadawekwa, Donna Zagohui.
Dance, straight from its heart, the fight stays. Her story of the life that the man himself a sacred time, white man. Healed our people and they took our land. Now they're fighting the nation. Motion can't stand. Our religion is not for sale.